We're going to be going through the honors practice quiz for Chapter 2, the honors practice quiz for Chapter 2. We have here, it says to calculate the distance between points H, which is at -7, 2, and M, which is at -2, and 6. Write in exact radical form. When using the slope, midpoint, or distance, it's recommended that you follow these 4 steps. 1, to say the equation and then to write it out. Then to write what's called a blank template, circle box, plug, chug. Step number 1, the distance equation is giant square root, subtract the x's squared, plus subtract the y's squared. In textbooks, you'd probably see x2 minus x1 and y2 minus y1. That doesn't really matter which one's x1 and x2. What does matter is the direction that you subtract, you stay consistent. I'll give you an example. Now we're going to write a template. A template is a blank equation without the x and the y. So you make it blank so it's easy to plug stuff in. Now we do circle box, plug, chug. We're going to circle the x's and plug them in, and notice I'm always going to go left to right. Box the y's, plug them in, again always left to right. Don't forget your square root sign. Now we're going to actually work this out. Double negatives become a positive. This becomes 5 times 5, which is -25, but it's positive because you're squaring here. So it's just going to be 25 plus 16 underneath the radical sign. We're going to do 25 plus 16. That's 11. Carry the 1, 41. It says to leave it in exact radical form. That means leave it under the radical sign. So your final answer is root 41. Leave it under the radical sign unless you get a perfect square root. It says find the slope of the line. There's a couple ways to find slope. One would be if you actually had 2 points, and you would simply do y minus y over x minus x, which would be the rise over the run. But in this case, you're actually given the equation of a line in standard form. So we're going to be using this. We want to get it into y equals mx plus b, because in this case, the m is slope. So I'm going to come over here, minus 4x, minus 4x. So I have 5y equals -4x minus 3. And I'm going to divide by 5, divide by 5, divide by 5. So my final equation is going to read y equals -4/5 x minus 3 over 5, 3/5. So my slope here is going to be -4/5. It says finger track and read the information. Find anything and everything that you can find. It says in the figure below, G is the midpoint of FH, F is between E and H, EG is 9, and FH is 12. It says to find EH, but I'm going to just find everything to make it easy. So step 1 is I'm going to mark G is the midpoint of FH. So I trace FH. G's the middle, so I'm going to circle that. I'm going to write midpoint, just MP, meaning midpoint, and that means these 2 segments must be equal. Cross stuff out as you account for it. Next one, F is between E and H. So here's F, here's E, here's H. It just says it's between. That does not mean it's the midpoint. And then the last one is the fact that E to G is 9. And F to H is 12. This is the second time you've seen FH. FH was over here and FH is over here, but FH has been cut in half. So that means that if 12 is cut in half, that this is 6, this is 6. And this segment right here is going to be 9 minus 6, so it's 3. So here's my list. I know EF is 3, F to G is 6, G to H is 6, and then what we were actually looking for, E to H is going to be 3 plus 6 plus 6. Be careful with that 9 there. That's an overlap, so you need to be careful. EH is actually 3 plus 6 plus 6, so of course that is 15. Graph the line. There's two ways to graph the line, using intercepts or using y equals mx plus b. You should be competent with both. Let's do intercepts first. In intercepts, we're going to take, if x is 0, so if you put a 0 here, it just zeroes the whole thing out, and we get 3y equals negative 12, that means that's going to be negative 4. And then if you put a 0 where the y is, so if we put a 0 there, that zeroes everything out, you get 2x equals negative 12. And of course, you're going to get negative 6. So let's graph these 2 points. 0, negative 4. That's 0, negative 4. That's the y-intercept. And then negative 6, 0. That's the x-intercept. And then here is our line. So let's change it to y equals mx plus b and see what happens. So the first thing I'm going to do is minus 2x, and I end up with 3y equals negative 2x minus 12. And divide by 3, divide by 3, divide by 3. And I get y equals negative 2/3 x minus 4. I'm going to plot that. I start with my b, which is my y-intercept. And that's at negative 4, so that's right there. And then my rise and my run is 2/3, and it's negative, so I know my line's going to go down from left to right. So I'm going to rise 2 and go to the left 3. 1, 2, and 3. There's my line. Or I can go down 2, 1, 2, and run 3 to the right. 1, 2, 3. Either way, it's the same line. It says segment ST has a midpoint of W. So let's start, it says the coordinates of S is unknown, the midpoint of W is 2, 5, the other endpoint T is at 8, 12. Find the coordinates of point S. There's a couple ways to solve it. Let's start it with what I call the visual method. So first, here we have a segment ST with the midpoint of W. Because it's a midpoint, we have hatch marks. We've accounted for that piece of information. We cross it out. Coordinates of S is unknown. That means it is an XY coordinate, but we do not know it. It says the midpoint is at 2, 5, so this is 2, 5. Cross stuff out as you account for it. The other endpoint T is at 8, 12. Find the coordinates. Okay, so one way to do this is to take a look here, and we want to find the we don't know the distance between this unknown number and 2, but we do know the distance between 8 and 12, 2 and 8. And the distance there is 4 units. It is 6 units, because 8 minus 2 is 6. So that means the distance going this way must also be 6, because of the definition of a midpoint. And so we see here that we went from 8 down to 12, so 2 down this way must be subtraction. So you ask yourself, if you were to go left in the number line 6 units, where would you be? And in this case, you would be at negative 4. And then we do the other one. we're going to go the distance between now 12 and 5, and that's going to be 7 units. And notice we're going down the number line this time, and 5 to that must also be 7 units. 12 minus 7 gave us 5. 5 minus 7 is going to give us -2. There's a way to check, but we're going to do the check after I show the algebraic method. Algebraically, the midpoint equation is average the x's, x plus x over 2, comma, average the y's, y plus y over 2. So what we have here is we have the midpoint at 2, 5. So algebraically, we could do this. X plus 8, that would be x plus 8 over 2 would be, is 2, that's the x coordinate. And the other one would be y plus y, y plus 12 over 2 equals 5. In this case, you solve for x. The easiest way to do that is put this over 1 and cross multiply. You solve for x and y in this case, and you're going to get -4, +2. Now here's the check. The check is to actually average -4 plus the other x, which is 8, divide by 2, and then -2 plus 12, divide by 2. You average this out, and that's going to be 4 over 2, which of course is 2. That's going to be 10 over 2, which is 5. And there's your check because you have the same midpoint. Okay, in the figure below, find anything and everything that you can find. So first off, we're going to identify what we have here. These are called vertical angles. Vertical angles are always congruent. These are vertical angles too, going this way. They are also congruent. And then you need to look at angles that are back to back and form a line, make what's called a linear pair. So these angles here, back to back, form a line. They are called a linear pair, which means they're going to sum 180, or they're supplementary. So you don't ask yourself what should you do, what can you do in this scenario. So let's start with something simple. If this is 110, then because these are vertical and they are congruent, this must be 110 as well. And then here I have 180. So I know 110 plus this angle right here, which is 5x plus 40 equals 180. You subtract 110 both sides, and we're going to end up with 5x plus 40 equals 70. Now we're going to minus 40 both sides, and we get 5x equals 30, and of course x equals 6. So now we put 6 in. 5 times 6 is 30. 30 plus 40 equals 70. Now here's the really easy way to check. You ask yourself, 110 plus 70, does it equal 180? And the answer is yes. And of course this over here is also going to be 70 degrees because they are vertical angles. In the diagram below, find anything and everything that you can find. Mark the information directly on the diagram. Okay, it says JKM, so I go JKM, trace and sweep, is 97 degrees. Get in the habit of crossing stuff out as you account for it. We're also told NKM is 94, so NKM, trace and sweep, is 34 degrees. We're also told that KN, so you trace KN, bisects LKM. Here's L, there's K, there's M. That word bisect means that these two are congruent. Find anything and everything you can find, but you especially want to find JKL in this case. Well, let's see what we can find here. Well, because of the bisector, if this is 34, this must be 34 as well. which is if you add those up, you're going to end up with 68 degrees. And if that's 68 degrees, to get this right here, we're simply doing 97 minus 68. And we get 29 degrees. Did you find all the angles? Yes. Okay, this last one. First we're going to finger track and read and highlight. We're going to go down this list, highlight, underline, chunk, draw label list, cross stuff out, trace and sweep angles. Make sure you follow this list. Step number 1. Segment EF intersects GH at point Q. Angle EQG and GQF form a linear pair. So we know this. We have segments intersecting at point Q. We have two angles that form a linear pair. Angles EQG is twice the measure of GQS. QI bisects FQH. QJ bisects EQH. Find anything and everything that you can find. So we have highlighted. Now we're going to chunk, which means to break it down into chunks. Usually that happens at punctuation or conjunctions. Okay, so we start with the first chunk. Segment EF intersects segment GH at point Q. So here we have EF, GH at point Q. We don't know whether or not it makes a right angle, so I'm going to skew it so you don't automatically confuse it with the right angle. EF, GH intersecting at point Q. Then you want to get in the habit of crossing stuff out as you account for it. It says EQG and GQF form a linear pair. So let's trace that. EQG, GQF form what's called a linear pair. And again, cross it out when you're done with it. Then you're told that EQG is twice the measure of GQF. So EQG is twice the measure of this angle, I'll just call it that, GQF. So if that's twice of that, we're just going to call it, let's call it X variable. That means this here has to be 2X. Next is QI bisects FQH, so here's F, QH, QI bisects, so that cuts it in half. So trace, sweep, sweep, hatch, cross it out. And then the last one here is QJ bisects EQH. So here's E, go to Q, go to H, QJ, cuts that in half. That's our second set, so we have a second hatch. Find anything and everything that you can find. We drew, we labeled, we listed, we crossed stuff out. Now we're going to trace and sweep angles and see what we have here. We know that this whole thing adds up to 180, so we have 180 equals 2x plus x. Of course, that's 3x equals 180. Divide by 3, we get x equals 60. That means this angle here is 60. And this angle here is 120. Now, we look for straight lines because vertical angles is the key here. So we go like this, two straight lines. You see them, and you look for what I call bow tie angles. So if this is 60, that means this thing over here is 60 because those are vertical angles. So this whole thing is 60, but then we have hatch marks and bisectors. That means this is 30 and 30. And we come here, and if this is 120, we have bow tie angles here as well, or vertical angles. This must be 120. which means that these each are 60 and 60. And this process of finding every potential angle is called squeeze the sponge, which means you find everything possible. And in this case, we have.